He was the most feared man in New York, a shadow kingpin who could silence witnesses with a single nod. But the one silence Dante Moretti couldn't break was his own son's. For 6 years, the boy hadn't spoken, hadn't reacted, and hadn't connected with the world, or so Dante thought. The best doctors in Switzerland had called the boy a lost cause. But then came a Tuesday night at a crowded restaurant and a trembling waitress named Claire. Risking a bullet to the head for interrupting the Don, she didn't bring him wine. She pulled a strange, battered object from her apron. What happened next didn't just silence the room. It brought the Mafia lord to his knees and changed the underworld forever. The rain battered against the heavy glass windows of l'Orologio, Manhattan's most exclusive Italian restaurant, blurring the city lights into streaks of gold and charcoal. Inside, the air smelled of truffle oil, aged mahogany, and fear. Claire Dawson adjusted her apron, her hands trembling slightly as she tucked a stray lock of brown hair behind her ear. She had been working at l'Orologio for only 3 weeks, just long enough to know that when the manager, Mr. Bianchi, started sweating through his suit, trouble was walking through the door. "Claire," Mr. Bianchi hissed, grabbing her elbow a little too tightly near the kitchen pass. "Table 1, you're on it tonight." Claire's stomach dropped. Table 1 wasn't just a table. It was a territory. It was permanently reserved for Dante Moretti, the head of the Moretti crime family. The papers called him the Roman Wolf. He was a man who owned half the ports in New Jersey and half the judges in New York. Rumor had it he had once broken a sommelier's fingers for spilling a drop of Barolo on his cuff. "I thought Marcus was serving table 1, Claire whispered, glancing at the senior waiter, who was currently hiding in the wine cellar, pretending to organize inventory. "Marcus is indisposed," Bianchi said, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. "You're the only one left. Just pour the water, take the order, and for the love of God, do not look him in the eye for longer than a second. And the boy, just ignore the boy." Claire frowned. "The boy, his son, he brings him sometimes. The kid is defective. Just stay away from him." Before Claire could ask what defective meant, the heavy oak doors at the front of the restaurant swung open. The ambient chatter of the restaurant, usually a dull roar of deal-making and gossip, was severed instantly. It was as if someone had sucked the oxygen out of the room. Dante Moretti walked in. He was taller than he looked in the paparazzi photos, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Claire's entire year of rent. His face was hard angles and cold composure, his eyes dark and scanning the room for threats. Flanking him were 2 bodyguards, massive men, whose suits strained against their shoulders. But Claire's eyes were drawn to the small figure trailing behind Dante's long strides. It was a boy, no older than 6. He wore a miniature version of his father's suit, but it looked uncomfortable on him. His dark hair was combed severely to the side, and his eyes, wide, dark, and incredibly expressive, darted around the room frantically. He wasn't walking with the confident stride of a mafia prince. He was stumbling, his hands clamped over his ears, as if the silence of the room was actually a deafening scream. Dante reached the table and sat down, not waiting for the maitre d' to pull out his chair. The bodyguards took up positions by the entrance and the kitchen door. The boy, Leo, hesitated. "Sit," Dante said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made the silverware rattle. The boy didn't move. He was staring at the crystal chandelier above, mesmerized by the way the light fractured through the glass. "Leonardo," Dante said sharper this time. He snapped his fingers near the boy's face. The boy flinched, startled, and scrambled into his chair. He looked down at the tablecloth, his small fingers picking nervously at the hem of his napkin. Claire took a deep breath, grabbed the water pitcher, and walked toward the lion's den. Just pour the water. Don't look him in the eye. She approached the table, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Good evening, sir," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Sparkling or still?" Dante didn't look up from the menu. "Still. No ice." Claire poured the water into his glass with surgical precision. She moved to the boy's side. As she poured water into his glass, Leo didn't look at the water. He was looking at the bottom of the glass, watching the vibrations of the liquid as it hit the crystal. He reached out and touched the base of the glass, feeling the hum of the pour. "Stop that!" Dante snapped at his son. Leo didn't react. He kept his finger on the glass, his head tilted, feeling the resonance. Dante reached out and gripped the boy's wrist, pulling it away. "I said, stop. Act like a Moretti, not a—" He trailed off, the insult hanging in the air, heavy and cruel. Claire froze. She knew that look in the boy's eyes. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't stupidity. It was isolation. "He likes the vibration," Claire said. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Dante's head snapped up. His eyes, cold as slate, locked onto hers. The restaurant seemed to tilt on its axis. Mr. Bianchi, watching from the corner, looked like he was about to faint. "Excuse me," Dante asked, his voice lethally quiet. "The water, sir." Claire stammered, gripping the pitcher so hard her knuckles turned white. When it hits the glass, it creates a resonance. He can feel it in his fingertips. It's soothing. Dante stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. He's not soothing himself. He's being absent-minded. My son was born deaf, Signorina. He hears nothing. He understands nothing. He lives in a world of silence because he is broken. Do not presume to tell me what he feels. Claire felt a flash of heat rise up her neck. Not fear, but anger. She looked at Leo. The boy had retreated into himself. His shoulders hunched, his eyes glazed over. He wasn't broken. She could see the intelligence burning behind those dark eyes, trapped behind a wall of silence that his father refused to learn how to climb. "My apologies, sir," Claire murmured. She finished pouring and retreated to the safety of the kitchen. "You have a death wish," Bianchi hissed at her as she pushed through the swing doors. "I told you to ignore the boy. Dante Moretti has spent millions on specialists. If he says the boy is broken, the boy is broken. You're just a waitress, Claire. Do not play doctor with the mafia." Claire leaned against the stainless steel counter, closing her eyes. She wasn't just a waitress. Not really. But in New York, nobody cared about who you used to be in Ohio, or the degree you had to abandon when your mother got sick and the debts piled up. "I'm taking their order," Claire said, pushing off the counter. "Send Marcus," Bianchi begged. "Marcus is hiding in the Chardonnay crate," Claire said. "I'm going back out." By the time the appetizers arrived, the tension at table 1 was thick enough to choke on. Dante was on his phone, barking orders in rapid-fire Italian to someone named Luca. Leo was left alone with a plate of calamari he hadn't touched. The restaurant had filled up, and the noise level had risen. For a hearing person, it was a low hum. But for Leo, Claire realized it must have been a chaotic storm of sensory input he couldn't filter. The vibration of footsteps on the wooden floor, the clinking of silverware, the heavy bass of the jazz music playing over the speakers. He could feel all of it thumping against his body, but he had no context for it. Claire watched from the service station. She saw Leo starting to rock back and forth in his chair. It was a subtle movement at first, rhythmic and soothing. Dante hung up the phone and saw the rocking. He slammed his hand on the table. The silverware jumped. "Leonardo, enough!" Dante shouted. The restaurant went quiet again. People stared. Leo didn't hear the shout, but he saw the anger in his father's face and felt the violent slam on the table. The boy panicked. He didn't know why his father was angry. He had just been trying to calm the noise in his body. Leo stood up on his chair, letting out a guttural, high-pitched cry, the sound of a deaf child who cannot self-regulate the volume of his own voice. It was a sound of pure frustration. "Sit down." Dante stood up, his face flushing with embarrassment and rage. He grabbed Leo's arm. Leo yanked back, knocking over his water glass. The crystal shattered on the floor. The sound of breaking glass was the final straw. Dante Moretti looked like he was about to strike the boy, not out of malice, perhaps, but out of a desperate, aggressive helplessness. He raised his hand. "Don't you dare!" The shout didn't come from a bodyguard. It came from Claire. She rushed across the dining room, ignoring the gasps of the other patrons. She stepped right between the Mafia Don and his son. Dante froze his hand raised. He looked at Claire as if she were an alien species. "Move," he growled, "before I have you removed permanently." "He's not being naughty," Claire said, her voice shaking, but her feet planted firmly. "He's overstimulated. He can't hear the music, but he can feel the bass in the floorboards, and it's scaring him. Look at him." Dante looked at his son. Leo was hyperventilating, tears streaming down his face, clutching his chest. "He's defective," Dante spat, though his voice wavered slightly. "He needs discipline." "He needs to know you're there," Claire snapped. She turned her back on the most dangerous man in New York and knelt down in front of the sobbing boy. She didn't try to hug him or restrain him. She reached into the front pocket of her apron. Every bodyguard in the room, tensed hands going to the holsters inside their jackets. Bianchi shrieked from the back. "Claire, no." If she pulled out a weapon, she would be dead before she hit the floor. But Claire didn't pull out a gun. She pulled out a small velvet drawstring pouch. She opened it quickly and removed a strange silver object. It looked like a two-pronged fork made of heavy surgical steel. A tuning fork, specifically a weighted medical-grade tuning fork used for bone conduction testing. Dante watched, confused, his hand hovering near his jacket. "What is that?" Claire ignored him. She struck the tuning fork hard against the heel of her boot. The metal prongs blurred with vibration. She held the base of the fork up. Leo, tears in his eyes, flinched away. But Claire gently, slowly pressed the stem of the vibrating fork against the boy's collarbone. The effect was instantaneous. Leo gasped. His eyes went wide. He stopped crying immediately. The strong, pure frequency vibrated through his bones, bypassing his damaged ears and resonating directly in his inner ear. For a boy living in a world of muffled chaos, this was a clear, singular, beautiful sensation. A pure note. Claire struck it again and placed it on his elbow. Leo laughed. It was a rusty, unused sound, but it was a laugh. He reached out with trembling fingers and touched the fork. Claire smiled, tears pricking her own eyes. She struck the fork again, and this time she placed the stem against the wooden table. She gestured for Leo to put his hand on the wood. Leo placed his small palm flat on the table. He felt the hum. He looked up at Claire, his eyes shining with an intelligence that had been locked away for 6 years. He tapped the table, then tapped his chest. "I feel it." Claire lifted her hands. She didn't use standard American sign language. She used a modified tactile signal. She touched her chin, then moved her hand toward him. "Thank you." Leo clumsily mimicked the motion. The silence in the restaurant was total, but this time it wasn't a fearful silence. It was a stunned reverence. Claire stood up slowly and turned to face Dante. The Mafia Don was pale, all the color drained from his face. He was staring at his son, who was now calmly tracing the patterns of the wood grain, waiting for the next vibration. "He's not broken, Mr. Moretti," Claire said softly. "He just has a different way of touching the world. You've been trying to force sound into his ears. You should have been putting it in his hands." Dante looked from the boy to the cheap silver fork in Claire's hand. He looked at Claire, really looked at her for the first time. He didn't see a waitress anymore. "Who are you?" Dante whispered. "I'm just the waitress," Claire said, putting the tuning fork back in her pouch. "And I think table 1 needs a new glass of water." She turned to walk away, but she didn't get it far. "Wait." Dante's voice wasn't a bark this time. It was a plea. "My son." Dante swallowed hard, his mask of cruelty slipping to reveal a desperate father. He smiled. He hasn't smiled in 2 years. Claire turned back. "He's a bright kid, Mr. Moretti. He's starving for input. He's not ignoring you. He's bored because no one is speaking his language." Dante stepped closer to her, invading her personal space. The scent of expensive cologne and gun oil filled her nose. "And you speak his language. I used to study audiology," Claire said, clutching her tray. Well before life happened. I carry the fork because my little brother was deaf. It used to calm him down when the world got too loud." Dante stared at her for a long time. The gears in his head were turning, calculating, assessing. The danger in the room hadn't vanished, but it had shifted. He reached into his jacket pocket. The bodyguards flinched. Claire held her breath. He pulled out a business card. It was black with nothing but a phone number embossed in gold. "You finish your shift," Dante said. "Then you walk out that door. There will be a car waiting for you." "Sir, I have a job," Claire said, terrified. "I can't just—" "You had a job serving pasta to tourists," Dante interrupted. He glanced back at his son, who was now tapping the table rhythmically, looking peaceful. "Now you have a job saving my son. Don't make me ask twice, Claire." It wasn't a request. It was a summons. As Dante sat back down, picking up the menu with a trembling hand, Claire knew her life as she knew it was over. She had just walked into the lion's den, pulled a thorn from the paw of the cub, and now the lion wasn't going to let her leave. The alley behind l'Orologio smelled of stale rain and garbage, a stark contrast to the truffle oil scent inside. Claire stood by the metal exit door, clutching her purse against her chest as if it were a shield. It was 11:30 p.m. Her shift was over. Mr. Bianchi had practically shoved her out the door, pressing an envelope of cash into her hand, her final wages, and whispering, "Good luck, Claire. Don't look back." He looked at her like she was a ghost, someone already dead. A black SUV sat idling at the curb, its windows tinted so dark they looked like polished obsidian. The engine purred with a low, menacing rumble. As soon as the metal door clicked shut behind her, the back door of the SUV swung open. A man stepped out. It wasn't Dante. It was one of the giants who had guarded the door, a man with a scar running through his left eyebrow and a neck as thick as a tree trunk. "Miss Dawson," the man said. His voice was gravel. "Mr. Moretti is waiting." "I need to go home first," Claire stammered. "I have a cat. I have rent to pay. I didn't agree to move in." The man didn't blink. "Your rent has been paid for the next year. The cat is being collected by a pet service as we speak and will be transported to the estate. Get in the car." Claire's blood ran cold. They knew where she lived. In the 2 hours since Dante had left the restaurant, they had found her apartment, paid her landlord, and kidnapped her cat. This wasn't a job offer. It was an acquisition. She got in the car. The interior smelled of leather and ozone. Dante Moretti was sitting on the other side of the back seat, reading a file on a tablet. He didn't look up as she slid in, trembling. The door slammed shut, sealing her in a soundproof capsule with the most dangerous man on the East Coast. The car pulled away, merging seamlessly into the late-night Manhattan traffic. "You audited classes at Columbia University for 2 years, Dante said, swiping a finger across his tablet. "Advanced audiology, speech pathology. You dropped out 3 years ago when your mother, Sarah Dawson, was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. She died 6 months later. You were left with $40,000 in medical debt." Claire stared at him, her mouth agape. "How do you know that?" Dante finally looked at her. The streetlights outside cast rhythmic shadows across his sharp jawline. "I know everything about the people I let near my son. You're clean, no police record, no drug habits, just poor and desperate." "I'm not desperate," Claire said, finding a sudden spark of courage. "I'm hard-working." "Same thing in this city," Dante countered dryly. He tapped the partition glass, and the driver sped up, heading toward the George Washington Bridge. "My son Leonardo. The doctors in Zurich said his auditory nerve is completely severed. He has 0 hearing. They suggested a cochlear implant, but the surgery carries a risk of facial paralysis, and the success rate for his specific condition is low. I refuse to let them cut into his head." "That was a valid choice," Claire said, her professional instincts kicking in, despite her fear. "Implants aren't a cure. They're a tool. If he's not a candidate, forcing it could traumatize him." Dante's eyes narrowed. "Everyone else told me I was denying him a normal life. They told me I was being stubborn. Normal is overrated, Mr. Moretti. You don't need to fix him. You need to reach him." Dante fell silent, staring out the window at the dark Hudson River passing below. For a moment, the mask of the ruthless Don slipped, revealing a man who was simply tired. His mother. She died when he was born. Complications. Claire softened. "I'm sorry." "She was a pianist," Dante said, his voice barely a whisper. "She loved music. It feels like a cruel joke from God, that her son lives in silence." The vulnerability vanished as quickly as it appeared. Dante straightened his tie, the steel returning to his spine. "You will live at the estate. You will be his governess. You will teach him how to communicate. You will teach me how to communicate with him. In exchange, your debt is erased. You will receive $10,000 a month, and you will sign a non-disclosure agreement that says if you speak about my business, my home, or my associates to anyone, well, you won't be speaking again." Claire swallowed hard. The money was life-changing. It was freedom from the crushing weight of debt she'd been carrying for years. But the cost was her freedom. "And if I say no?" Claire asked. Dante turned to her, his dark eyes unreadable. "We are already crossing the bridge, Claire. You're already in." The car sped into the night, leaving the lights of the city behind, as they headed toward the dark wooded cliffs of the Palisades. The Moretti estate wasn't a house. It was a fortress disguised as a mansion. High stone walls topped with iron spikes surrounded the property. Cameras swiveled on every corner. The gates opened with a heavy mechanical groan as the SUV rolled up the long, winding driveway. The house itself was a sprawling Gothic revival structure, all grey stone and pointed arches. It looked beautiful, imposing and utterly cold. Claire was shown to her room by a housekeeper named Eleanor, a stern woman in her 60s who looked at Claire with a mixture of pity and suspicion. The room was luxurious, king-sized bed silk sheets, a private balcony, but Claire barely noticed. Her mind was on the boy. "Where is he?" Claire asked Elena, as the woman put down a stack of fresh towels. "Master Leonardo is in the nursery." "West Wing," Elena clipped. "The boss said you start tomorrow." "I start now," Claire said. She didn't know where the confidence came from, perhaps from the adrenaline still pumping through her veins. She grabbed her bag, which contained the tuning fork, and walked out of the room. She found the nursery by following the silence. The rest of the house had the subtle sounds of security guards walking, radios crackling and distant phones ringing. But the West Wing was dead quiet. Claire pushed open the heavy oak door. The room was massive. It was filled with the most expensive toys money could buy. An electric train set circled the room. A robotic dinosaur sat in the corner. A high-end television was mounted on the wall playing cartoons. Leo was sitting in the middle of the floor, his back to the door. He was surrounded by a pile of Lego bricks. He wasn't building anything. He was just clicking 2 bricks together over and over again. Click, click, click. He was feeling the snap in his fingers. Claire stepped inside and closed the door. The vibration of the door latching made Leo pause. He didn't turn around, but he stiffened. He knew someone was there. Claire took off her shoes. She wanted to feel the vibrations of the floor just like him. She walked in her socks, stepping heavily. Thump, thump, thump. Leo turned around. His eyes went wide when he saw her. He recognized her, the lady with the magic metal stick. Claire smiled and sat down on the floor, cross-legged about 5 feet away from him. She didn't wave. She didn't speak. She waited. Leo watched her warily. He held up a red Lego brick. Claire reached into her pocket. She didn't take out the tuning fork this time. She took out a small rubber balloon she had grabbed from a party supply bag left in the kitchen area of the restaurant before she left. She blew it up, tying it off. She held the balloon out to Leo. He looked confused. Claire placed the balloon on the floor and tapped it with her finger. It bounced. Then she pulled her phone out of her pocket, turned the music volume to maximum, and placed the phone against the balloon. She played a song with heavy bass, some old hip-hop track. She gestured for Leo to touch the balloon. Leo crawled forward, hesitant. He reached out and placed his fingertips on the taut rubber surface of the balloon. His face transformed. The balloon acted as an amplifier for the vibrations. He could feel the beat, the rhythm, the complex patterns of the bass line vibrating against his skin in high definition. It was better than the floor. It was concentrated sound. A smile broke across his face, a genuine toothy grin that lit up the gloomy room. He looked at Claire and laughed a high, breathless sound. Claire tapped her chest. Feel. Leo tapped his chest. Feel. What are you doing? The voice came from the doorway. Claire jumped and Leo flinched, losing contact with the balloon. Dante was standing there. He had discarded his suit jacket and rolled up his white sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle and ink. He was holding a glass of amber liquid. He looked exhausted, leaning against the doorframe, as if the weight of his empire was crushing him. "I'm showing him music," Claire said, keeping her voice low, though she knew Leo couldn't hear. "He can't hear the melody, but he can feel the rhythm. The balloon amplifies the vibration." Dante walked into the room. He looked at his son, who was now hugging the balloon to his chest, closing his eyes and swaying to the beat, vibrating through the rubber. "I bought him a Steinway piano," Dante said, gesturing to a covered shape in the corner. "I bought him speakers that cost $50,000, and you make him happy with a 10-cent piece of rubber." "Money doesn't buy physics, Mr. Moretti," Claire said softly. "You've been trying to give him the best, but he just needs the tactile. He needs to touch the sound." Dante walked over and sat down on the floor. It was a jarring sight, the Don of New York sitting on a rug in his sock's glass of whiskey in hand. "Show me," Dante said. Claire handed the balloon to Dante. "Hold it. Close your eyes." Dante hesitated, looking at the balloon like it was a bomb. But he did it. He closed his eyes and held the rubber sphere. Claire turned the volume up on her phone. Dante sat there for a moment, feeling the thrumming beat against his palms. He opened his eyes and looked at Leo. Leo was watching his father with intense curiosity. Slowly, Dante extended the balloon toward his son. Leo reached out. They both held the balloon, the vibration passing between their hands, connecting them through the rhythm. For the first time in 6 years, they were sharing an experience. Leo looked up at Dante's face. He reached out a small hand and touched Dante's beard. Dante froze. He stopped breathing. Leo had never initiated physical contact like that. "He's curious," Claire whispered. "The vibration makes him feel safe. When he feels safe, he explores." Dante turned his gaze to Claire. His dark eyes were intense, stripping away her defenses. There was a heat in them that made her breath hitch. It wasn't just gratitude. It was intrigue. It was the look of a man who had found something rare and didn't know whether to protect it or destroy it. "You stay," Dante said, his voice rough. "Whatever you need, whatever equipment, whatever balloons, you buy it. You fix this." "I can't fix his ears, Dante," Claire said, using his first name without thinking. "I don't care about his ears anymore," Dante murmured, watching his son. "Fix the bridge between us." Suddenly, the moment was shattered. A man appeared at the door, Luca the driver. He looked tense, his hand hovering near his waist. "Boss," Luca said, his voice sharp. "We have a problem at the docks. The Russians, they intercepted the shipment." The father vanished. The Don returned instantly. Dante's face hardened into a mask of stone. He stood up, the warmth evaporating from the room. "Stay here," Dante commanded Claire, his voice icy. "Do not leave this room. Do not open the door for anyone but me or Luca." "Is everything okay?" Claire asked, clutching the phone. "No," Dante said, checking the magazine of a pistol he pulled from a holster at the small of his back. "Welcome to the family, Claire." He turned and strode out, leaving Claire alone in the nursery, with a deaf child, a vibrating balloon, and the sudden terrifying realization that the walls of this fortress were not built to keep people out. They were built to keep the war from getting in. And she was now on the inside. 3 in the morning, the time when the world is stripped of its pretenses and left raw. Claire sat in the library of the Moretti estate, a leather-bound book open on her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in an hour. The house was silent, but it wasn't the peaceful silence of a sleeping home. It was the tense, holding its breath silence of a bunker, waiting for the bomb to drop. Leo was asleep in the West Wing, clutching his vibrating balloon. He slept soundly, immune to the thunder rolling outside, immune to the sirens wailing in the distance. Claire envied him that peace. She heard the front door open. It wasn't the heavy mechanical groan of the main gates this time. It was the quiet click of the service entrance. Then a heavy thud, like a sack of flour, hitting the marble floor. Claire dropped her book and ran into the hallway. Dante Moretti was leaning against the wall, his face grey, his breath coming in ragged, wet gasps. His pristine white shirt was ruined, the entire left side soaked in a dark, spreading crimson stain. Luca, the driver, was trying to hold him up, but Dante was a big man, and he was sliding down the wallpaper. "Get the doctor," Luca grunted, struggling under the weight. "No doctor." Dante wheezed, his teeth gritted. "No hospitals. Too much heat. The police are already swarming the docks." "You're bleeding out, boss," Luca shouted. "Bring him to the kitchen," Claire ordered. Her voice was surprisingly steady. She didn't feel steady, but panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. "The lighting is better, and there's vodka and boiling water." Dante looked up, his eyes hazy with pain. "Claire, go to bed." "Shut up and walk," she snapped. They dragged him into the industrial-sized kitchen. Luca hoisted Dante onto the stainless steel island. Claire immediately went to work. She grabbed the shears from the knife block and cut away the ruined shirt. The wound was ugly, a jagged graze across his ribs and a deep puncture in his upper deltoid. A bullet had passed through, missing the bone, but tearing through muscle. It wasn't fatal, but he had lost a lot of blood. "I need a suture kit," Claire said. "Does this fortress have a first aid kit, or just guns?" "Cabinet above the fridge," Luca said, rushing to get it. Claire washed her hands, scrubbing them until they were pink. When Luca returned with a tactical medical kit, she took over. "This is going to hurt," she told Dante. Dante looked at her. He was sweating, his hair plastered to his forehead. "I've had worse." "Doesn't mean this won't sting." She poured alcohol over the wound. Dante hissed, his back arching off the table, the muscles in his abdomen contracting violently. He didn't scream, but the sound he made was a guttural growl of agony. Claire didn't flinch. She threaded the needle. For the next 20 minutes, the only sounds in the kitchen were the storm outside and the snip of scissors. Claire stitched him up with the precision she had learned while taking care of her mother's post-surgical wounds. Her hands, usually so gentle when teaching Leo sign language, were firm and efficient. When she tied the final knot and taped the gauze down, Dante slumped back, exhausted. Luca had stepped out to handle security, leaving them alone in the harsh fluorescent light. "You have good hands," Dante murmured, his eyes closed. "I learned from necessity," Claire said, wiping the blood from her fingers with a wet towel. "My mother had drains that needed changing. You learn fast when the person you love is in pain." Dante opened his eyes. They were dark, dilated, and fixed on her. "You think I'm a monster, don't you? Coming home at 3 a.m. with bullet holes in me." "I think you're a man in a dangerous line of work," Claire said diplomatically. She poured him a glass of water. "Drink." He ignored the water. He reached out and grabbed her hand. His grip was weak, but his skin was burning hot. "The Russians, they weren't just stealing cargo. They were mocking me. They said a man who can't raise a son can't run a city." Claire felt a chill run down her spine. "They know about Leo." "Everyone knows," Dante whispered. In my world, a weakness is a target. They think he makes me soft. They think because he can't hear, he's useless. He's not useless, Claire said fiercely. He's brilliant. Yesterday he learned the sign for hungry and play. He organized his blocks by vibrational density. He's smarter than half the men you employ. Dante pulled her hand closer, pressing it against his chest, right over his beating heart. Make him strong, Claire. Teach him, because if something happens to me, the wolves will come for him, and they won't show mercy. Claire looked down at the Mafia Don. In this light, stripped of his suit and his bravado, he wasn't a kingpin. He was just a terrified father bleeding on a kitchen table. I won't let anything happen to him, Claire promised. And I won't let anything happen to you either. You have to stay alive to see him grow up. Dante looked at her lips. The air in the kitchen shifted. The smell of antiseptic and blood faded, replaced by a sudden electric tension. He pulled her slightly closer. Claire leaned in, her heart hammering against her ribs. Boss! Luca burst back into the kitchen, phone in hand. Claire jumped back, her face flushing. Dante groaned, the moment shattered. What? Dante barked, pain and irritation lacing his voice. We found out who gave the Russians the route. Luca said, his face pale. It wasn't a leak at the docks. It was from the house. Dante sat up, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. His eyes turned into shards of ice. Who? We don't know yet, Luca said, but the encrypted comms came from inside the estate. Dante looked at Claire, then at the ceiling toward where his son was sleeping. The enemy wasn't just at the gates anymore. The enemy was in the living room. 2 weeks had passed since the shooting. Dante had healed with a supernatural speed, his shoulder stiff but functional. The atmosphere in the house, however, had not healed. It had festered. Security was tripled. Every member of the staff was vetted, re-vetted, and watched. Dante trusted no one, except seemingly Claire. Claire had become the center of Leo's world. The progress was staggering. She had introduced him to American Sign Language, ASL, but with a twist she taught him to feel the signs on her hands first, then perform them. They had a vocabulary of 50 words now. Father, Claire signed, tapping her thumb to her forehead. Leo mimicked her. Father. Home. She signed, bringing her fingers together near her chin. Home. Dante watched from the doorway of the nursery. He hadn't entered yet. He just watched a strange expression on his face, half pride, half sorrow. He felt like an outsider, looking in on a secret society of two. He's asking for you, Claire said, not turning around. She had learned to sense Dante's presence. The air always seemed to get heavier when he was near. Dante walked in. He keeps signing man. He points at the door. Claire gestured to Leo. Leo saw his father and scrambled up. He ran to Dante, not with the fear he used to have, but with excitement. He grabbed Dante's hand and placed it on his own throat. Then Leo made a low humming sound. He wanted Dante to feel the vibration of his voice. Dante knelt, placing his large, rough hand on the boy's small throat. He felt the hum. A lump formed in Dante's throat. I promised him an outing, Dante said, looking up at Claire. He's been locked in this house for months. I secured the botanical gardens in the Bronx, just for an hour. Private access, no public. Is it safe? Claire asked, her brow furrowing. I have 20 men sweeping the perimeter. It's safer than the White House. The Bronx Botanical Gardens were a lush explosion of green and violet, a stark contrast to the grey stone of the Moretti estate. The entire conservatory had been rented out. It was empty save for the Moretti security team, posted at every exit and hidden in the ferns. Leo was in heaven. For a deaf child, the visual stimulation was paradise. He ran from flower to flower, touching the petals, smelling the orchids, his eyes wide with wonder. Dante walked beside Claire, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes scanning the tree line, never resting. "He looks normal," Dante said softly, "like a normal boy." "He is normal, Dante," Claire corrected him. "He's just louder with his eyes." Dante stopped walking. He turned to Claire. They were standing under the glass dome of the palm house. "You've changed everything, Claire. You saved him. You might have saved me too." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her cheek. It was a tender gesture, shocking coming from a man who broke fingers for a living. "Dante," Claire breathed, leaning into his touch. Leo was a few yards away, staring at a large reflective glass pane that separated the tropical room from the desert room. He was tapping the glass, watching his reflection. Suddenly, Leo stopped tapping. He frowned. He pressed his face against the glass. He saw something. In the reflection of the glass behind a dense cluster of cacti in the adjacent room, Leo saw a flash, a tiny rhythmic sparkle of light, like a star winking. Leo didn't know what a sniper scope looked like, but he knew vibration, and he knew light. He turned around and waved his arms frantically at Claire. He signed the word Claire had taught him for bad. Then he pointed at the glass. Claire looked. She followed his finger. She saw the glint. "Dante, get down." Claire didn't think. She didn't calculate. She threw herself to the left, tackling Leo to the ground, shielding his small body with her own. Crack! The sound of the high-powered rifle shot shattered the tranquility of the garden. The glass pane next to Dante's head exploded into a million diamonds. If Claire hadn't screamed, if Dante hadn't flinched toward her voice, his brains would have been painting the orchids. "Sniper!" Dante roared, pulling his gun before the glass even hit the floor. Chaos erupted. The security team swarmed, shouting orders. 2 more shots rang out, digging divots into the stone path inches from Claire's boots. "Stay down!" Dante screamed, firing blindly toward the upper ridge of the glass ceiling where the shot had come from. He grabbed Claire and Leo by the collars of their shirts and dragged them behind a large concrete planter. Leo was crying not because of the noise, but because he could feel the terrifying vibrations of his father's shouting and the concussions of the gunfire slamming into the ground. "They're inside," Dante hissed, checking his ammo. "How the hell are they inside?" "The glass!" Claire gasped, checking Leo for injuries. Leo saw the light in the glass. Dante looked at his son. The boy was shaking, clutching Claire's arm. Then Dante's phone buzzed. Not a call, a text. He glanced at it. It was a message from an unknown number. "The boy is the anchor. Cut the anchor. The ship sails free. V." Dante's face went white, whiter than when he had been shot. "V," he whispered. "Vinny. Vincenzo Vinny Moretti, his cousin, his underboss, the man who was currently heading the security detail at the North Gate, the man who had held Leo when he was a baby. "It's Vinny." Dante growled, a sound so full of betrayal and rage it sounded inhuman. "He sold us out. He thinks if Leo dies, I'll be free to lead the family without distraction." "We have to move," Claire said, spotting movement on the upper walkway. "They're flanking us." "No," Dante said, standing up. He looked like the devil himself. "You take the boy. You run to the service exit. Luca is there. What about you? Claire cried. Dante looked at his cousin Vinny, who was now visible on the balcony, holding an assault rifle, looking down at them with a sorrowful expression. I'm going to have a family reunion, Dante said. He stepped out from behind the planter, fully exposed, raising his weapon. He didn't look back. Run! Claire, run! Claire grabbed Leo, lifted him into her arms and sprinted. She didn't look back at the gunfire. She didn't look back at the man she was falling in love with. She ran for the boy's life, while behind her, the glass house turned into a killing jar. The service exit of the Botanical Gardens was a blur of rain and adrenaline. Claire burst through the metal doors, clutching Leo to her chest, just as Luca's black SUV screeched to the curb. Get in! Luca roared, the tires smoking as he floored the accelerator before the door was even fully shut. Claire threw herself into the back seat. Where is Dante? She screamed, grabbing Luca's shoulder. He's still in there. He stays to clean the mess. Luca shouted over the roar of the engine, weaving through traffic with terrifying speed. If he dies a boss. If the boy dies, the line ends. Sit back. Claire slumped against the leather, pulling Leo close. The boy was trembling violently, unable to hear the sirens wailing behind them, but feeling the terrifying erratic vibration of the speeding car. Desperate Claire reached into her pocket. Her hands shook as she pulled out the tuning fork. She struck it hard against the seatbelt buckle and pressed the stem against Leo's sternum. The pure, steady hum flooded the boy's system, a lifeline in the chaos. Leo's breathing hitched, then slowed. He looked up at Claire, his dark eyes wide. Dad. He signed a shaky hand, tapping his forehead. Claire swallowed a sob, kissing his hair, holding the singing metal against him, until the fear began to fade. Back in the shattered ruins of the Palm House, the air was thick with gunpowder. Dante Moretti moved through the foliage like a panther bleeding from a cut on his cheek, his eyes fixed on the upper walkway. Come out, Dante, Vinny's voice echoed from above. Don't make this harder. You know I'm right. The boy is a liability. A deaf Don. It ends the Moretti line. I did this for you. Dante crouched behind a fern. You call it distraction, Vinny, he shouted back. I call it legacy. Legacy? Vinny laughed bitterly. He can't even hear the order to kill a man. He doesn't need to. Dante stepped out into the open, his arms spread wide, exposing himself to his cousin's rifle. Take the shot, Vinny. If you care about the family so much, kill the head and wear the crown. Vinny hesitated, unnerved by Dante's calm. He tightened his finger on the trigger. Click. Vinny froze, staring at his jammed weapon. You never checked your gear, Dante said, his voice cold and final. You relied on the noise. You never learned to listen to the silence. Dante raised his pistol. One shot rang out, deafening in the glass enclosure. Vinny crumpled over the railing, falling into the tropical undergrowth. Dante lowered his gun, looked at his cousin one last time, and turned away. He had a family to get to. The safe house was a glass fortress, perched on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic. 4 hours had passed. Claire paced the living room, terrified, while Leo slept on the sofa. Suddenly the front door chimed. Claire spun around, grabbing a heavy brass candlestick. The door opened, and Dante stood there. He was soaked, bruised, and looked like he had walked through hell. But he was alive. Dante, Claire whispered, dropping the weapon. He crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling her into a crushing embrace. He smelled of rain and iron. He's gone, Dante murmured into her hair. It's over. I thought you weren't coming back, Claire sobbed, Dante pulled back, cupping her face. I couldn't die. I couldn't leave him. I couldn't leave you. I'm just the governess Dante. No, he growled softly. You are the anchor. You're the only one who heard my son when I was deaf to him. He kissed her, a desperate, passionate seal of survival. As they broke apart, a rhythmic thump-thump sounded on the floor. Leo was standing there, stomping his foot. He pointed to Dante, then to Claire. Then he brought his 2 index fingers together and hooked them. Connect. Dante laughed, a sound of pure relief. He scooped his son up, pulling Claire in with them. Yes, Leo, he said. Connected. 6 months later, the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was packed with New York's elite. The 5 families were in attendance, whispering rumors that Dante Moretti was stepping down because of his defective son. Dante stood at the podium looking impeccable. Many of you ask about the future of the Moretti family, he announced. You ask about my legacy. I invite you to meet him. Leo walked out. He was 7 now, wearing a tuxedo. He walked confidently to a grand Steinway piano at the center of the stage. The room went silent. A deaf boy playing piano, Leo sat down. He placed his bare feet on the pedals to feel the reverb. He placed his hands on the keys and closed his eyes. He began to play. It wasn't Mozart. It was raw, percussive, and haunting. Leo slammed the bass keys, feeling the heavy vibrations shake his body, and fluttered the high notes to feel the sharp staccato in his fingertips. He was playing the vibration of the storm, the tuning fork, and his father's heartbeat. The room was spellbound. As Leo struck the final chord, letting the vibration fade, he stood up and turned to the crowd. The room erupted. Men who had killed for money were wiping their tears, giving a standing ovation. Leo couldn't hear the clapping, but he saw the people standing. He felt the floor shaking with their approval. He looked to the side. Claire was there, crying happy tears, signing applause. Dante walked out, his face beaming with ferocious pride. He placed a hand on Leo's shoulder. The Moretti family does not listen to the noise of the world, Dante declared. We make our own sound. Dante took Claire's hand on one side and Leo's on the other. The Mafia Boss, the waitress, and the boy who lived in silence stood united. Dante had stopped trying to fix his son, and in doing so, his son had fixed him. The silence was no longer empty. It was full of love, and that is the incredible story of how a simple tuning fork and a brave waitress changed the fate of the most dangerous family in New York. It reminds us that sometimes the people we think are broken are actually just operating on a frequency we haven't learned how to tune into yet. Dante thought he needed to cure his son's silence, but what he really needed was to learn how to listen to it. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a powerful story like this one. What would you have done if you were Claire? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.